In 1989, the BBC filmed a children's television pilot so disturbing that every single child actor on set reported the same nightmare for weeks after production wrapped. Not similar nightmares. Not nightmares about the same general theme. The same nightmare. Identical in detail. Down to the words spoken by a figure none of them could describe. A child psychologist brought in by the BBC wrote in an internal memo, and I'm quoting directly here, that these nightmares were, quote, not consistent with normal childhood anxiety responses. The pilot was never aired. It was never discussed publicly. It was, by every reasonable measure, buried. And for 35 years, it stayed buried, until a private collector purchased a lot of old media at an estate sale in Shropshire in early 2024 and found, nestled between a box of unlabeled Betamax tapes and a stack of water-damaged Radio Times magazines, a single broadcast quality tape marked with a handwritten label that read simply, Threshold, Pilot, not for TX. TX, in BBC shorthand, means transmission. Not for broadcast. This is the story of a children's show that was never meant to be seen again, the mathematician who created it, the children who performed in it, and the nightmares that followed them home. And the deeper I dug into this, the less comfortable I became with what I found, because the official explanation, the reason the BBC says this pilot was rejected, doesn't match the internal documents. It doesn't match the timeline. And it doesn't match what the children described. Something happened on that set. And 35 years later, nobody has adequately explained what. Let me set the stage. In the late 1980s, the BBC's children's programming division was in a period of ambitious experimentation. This was the era that gave us Look and Read, Through the Dragon's Eye, and countless other educational serials that blended live action with animation, puppetry, and genuinely inventive visual storytelling. There was a real institutional appetite for pushing boundaries, for finding new ways to make subjects like mathematics and science feel alive and compelling for young audiences. Budgets were modest but creative freedom was enormous. Producers were encouraged to take risks. And so, in the spring of 1989, a proposal landed on the desk of a commissioning editor whose name appears in the documents but whom I'll refer to only by their initials, DH, since they've never spoken publicly about this and I have no evidence they wish to. The proposal came from a man named Gerald Tournier. Tournier was not a television producer. He was a mathematician. Specifically, he was a lecturer in applied mathematics at the University of Birmingham who had developed, over the course of the 1980s, what he called a geometric pedagogy, a system for teaching mathematical concepts to children through visual patterns, spatial relationships, and what he described in his original proposal as the architecture of numbers made visible. The idea, on paper, was genuinely interesting. Rather than teaching children that 2 + 2 = 4 through rote repetition, Tournier wanted to show them what addition looked like, what subtraction felt like, how multiplication could be understood as a spatial phenomenon rather than an abstract operation. He'd published a handful of papers on this approach. He'd given lectures. He'd attracted a small but enthusiastic following within educational mathematics circles. And somehow, and the documents are genuinely unclear on how this connection was made, he'd gotten the attention of someone at the BBC. The proposal for Threshold described a 6-episode series aimed at children aged 7 to 11. Each episode would feature a character called Mr. Margin, a tall, thin man in a dark suit who would guide children through what Tournier called mathematical landscapes, physical sets designed to represent numerical concepts in three-dimensional space. The children would interact with these landscapes, solving problems by moving through them, and Mr. Margin would narrate, explain, and occasionally demonstrate concepts through what the proposal called visual transformations. Now, here's the first thing that struck me as unusual. In the proposal, Tournier was very specific about how Mr. Margin should look and behave. This wasn't a warm, approachable character in the mold of the typical children's television presenter. The proposal describes Mr. Margin as precisely formal, wearing a suit that is not quite black but not any other color, speaking in metered, rhythmic sentences, and never blinking while addressing the camera. That last detail is underlined in the original document. Never blinking. Tournier specified this for a children's show. He also specified that Mr. Margin should be shot primarily in medium close-up, slightly off-center in the frame, with the background deliberately out of focus. And that Mr. Margin should never be shown entering or leaving a scene. He should simply be there when the camera found him, and gone when it looked away. I want to pause on this because it matters. These aren't the creative directions of someone making a friendly educational program. These are the creative directions of someone constructing an atmosphere. And the question that kept nagging at me as I read through these documents was, an atmosphere designed to do what, exactly? The BBC approved a pilot. Not a full series, just a single episode to test the concept, gauge audience response, and evaluate production feasibility. A budget was allocated. A small production team was assembled. And in June of 1989, filming began at BBC Pebble Mill in Birmingham, which was, conveniently, close to Tournier's university. The pilot episode was titled The Space Between Numbers. According to the production documents, it featured Mr. Margin introducing a group of 5 children to the concept of number lines and negative numbers by leading them through a set designed to look like a long, narrow corridor that extended in both directions into darkness. The children would walk along the corridor, encountering numbers painted on the walls, and Mr. Margin would explain how moving in one direction meant adding and moving in the other meant subtracting. Simple enough, right? A spatial metaphor for a mathematical concept. Exactly what Tournier proposed. But the production notes reveal something else. Several something elses, actually. First, the set. Multiple members of the production crew noted in post-production reports that the corridor set was, to use the words of the set designer, more extensive than planned. The original set designs called for a corridor approximately 40 feet long, dressed to suggest infinite extension through forced perspective and painted backdrops. But the set as built, and this is documented in an internal cost review, was nearly 80 feet long, constructed to fill the entire length of Studio A at Pebble Mill. The cost review notes this discrepancy and flags it as a budget concern, but there's no record of anyone authorizing the expanded set. The set designer's report simply states that Mr. Tournier insisted on the additional depth, and that the change was implemented without formal approval. When the cost review asked who had authorized the additional construction, there is no response in the file. Second, the lighting. The corridor set was lit in a way that the lighting director described as mathematically precise, and yes, he used that word, mathematically, with light levels decreasing at a fixed rate the further you move from center. The result, visible in still photographs included in the production file, is a corridor that appears to dissolve into total darkness at both ends, with the children and Mr. Margin occupying a shrinking pool of illumination that moves with them as they walk. The lighting director noted that this scheme was technically accomplished but atmospherically inappropriate for the target demographic and recommended brightening the set overall. His recommendation was overruled by Tournier. And this brings me to the third detail, the one that I think matters most, Gerald Tournier's role on set. In the original production agreement, Tournier was credited as educational consultant, an advisory role with no creative authority over filming decisions. But every account from the production team describes him as functioning as a de facto director, overriding decisions about framing, lighting, pacing, and performance. The actual director assigned to the pilot, a woman named Susan Price who had directed several well-regarded episodes of other BBC children's programs, appears to have been gradually sidelined during the 3-day shoot. Her own post-production report is terse and clearly frustrated. She writes, and I quote, "Mr. Tournier's involvement exceeded the scope of his consultancy. Several of his directorial choices were, in my professional opinion, inappropriate for the intended audience, but my objections were not supported by the producer." She does not elaborate on what those choices were. The pilot was completed. It was edited. A rough cut was assembled and screened internally in late July 1989. And this is where things take a turn. The internal screening report is brief. It describes the pilot as technically proficient but tonally inconsistent with BBC children's programming standards. It recommends against commissioning a full series. On the surface, this looks like a straightforward creative rejection, the kind of thing that happens to dozens of pilots every year. Concept didn't work, tone was wrong, move on. But here's what the screening report doesn't mention, what was only revealed through a separate set of documents obtained through a Freedom of Information request filed in 2024 after the pilot's rediscovery. 3 of the 5 child actors who appeared in the pilot, I'll call them Child A, Child B, and Child C, since they were minors at the time and their identities have been protected in all available documents, reported to their parents within days of filming that they were experiencing persistent, recurring nightmares. This in itself might not be remarkable. Children have nightmares. Filming in a dark, unfamiliar studio environment could certainly be unsettling for a 7 or 8-year-old. But these weren't ordinary nightmares, and the BBC took them seriously enough to bring in a child psychologist, Dr. Helen Ashworth, to evaluate the children and prepare a report. Dr. Ashworth's report, dated August 14, 1989, is the single most unsettling document in the entire file. I've read it multiple times now, and each time I notice something new that makes me deeply uncomfortable. Let me walk you through what she found. Dr. Ashworth interviewed each of the 3 children separately, in their homes, with their parents present. She was not told in advance what the other children had reported. This is important. She was conducting independent evaluations, not a group assessment. And what she found was this. All 3 children described the same nightmare. Not a similar nightmare. The same one. In the nightmare, each child reported being in a long, dark corridor. They were alone. They were walking, but they couldn't tell which direction they were going. The numbers on the walls, which they recognized from the set, were present, but they were wrong. The children couldn't articulate exactly how they were wrong, but all 3 used the same phrase to describe them. They said the numbers were, in the wrong order. Not jumbled or random. In the wrong order. As if there were a correct order that wasn't the standard numerical sequence, and the numbers on the walls were deviating from it. At the end of the corridor, or rather at both ends, because the children described the corridor as having no clear beginning or end, there was a figure. This is where Dr. Ashworth's report becomes genuinely disturbing. All 3 children identified the figure as Mr. Margin. But they also all said, independently, that it wasn't the actor who played Mr. Margin. It looked like him. It was wearing the same suit. It was standing in the same way. But it wasn't him. When Dr. Ashworth pressed them on how they knew this, the children couldn't explain. They just knew. One child, Child B, said something that Ashworth flagged with a marginal note and 2 underlines. Child B said, he was standing at both ends at the same time. The figure, in the nightmare, did not move. It did not speak. It simply stood at both ends of the corridor, watching, while the child walked endlessly in the middle, unable to reach either end, unable to stop, unable to turn around because turning around only revealed another end of the corridor that was equally far away, with the same figure standing in it. The nightmare did not end. The children did not wake up from a climactic moment. They simply eventually woke up. And then, the next night, they had the same nightmare again. Dr. Ashworth's clinical assessment is measured and professional, but her conclusions are startling. She writes that the consistency of the reports across 3 independent interviews exceeds what would be expected from shared environmental exposure. In other words, yes, the children all experienced the same filming environment, but that alone doesn't adequately explain why their nightmares are identical in specific detail. She notes that children who experience distressing events together typically generate nightmares that share thematic elements but differ in specific imagery, narrative structure, and emotional tenor. These nightmares did not differ. They were, in her words, remarkably, perhaps unprecedentedly, consistent. And then she writes the line that has haunted me since I first read it. The content and structure of these nightmares are not consistent with normal childhood anxiety responses. The degree of symbolic coherence and the absence of personalized distortion suggest either a shared external source of the imagery or an exposure to a stimulus designed to produce a specific psychological response. Read that again. A stimulus designed to produce a specific psychological response. A child psychologist, brought in by the BBC, is suggesting in an official internal memo that something about the production of this pilot was engineered, designed, to implant a specific image, a specific experience, in the minds of the children who participated in it. Now, Dr. Ashworth does not speculate about what that stimulus might have been. She does not accuse Tournier or anyone else of deliberate wrongdoing. Her report is carefully worded and clinically appropriate. But the implication is extraordinary. And what makes it more extraordinary is what happened next. Nothing. That's the most disturbing part. Nothing happened. There was no investigation. There was no follow-up with the children. There was no inquiry into Tournier's methods or his geometric pedagogy. The pilot was simply shelved. The screening report, remember, doesn't even mention the nightmares. It cites tonal inconsistency as the reason for rejection. Dr. Ashworth's report was filed, and as far as the available documents show, never referenced again in any BBC correspondence. The pilot tape was not destroyed. BBC archival policy at the time was to retain all completed productions, but it was not catalogued in the standard way. It was, effectively, lost within the system. And Gerald Tournier returned to the University of Birmingham and never worked with the BBC again. Now, I need to address something here. I've been describing these events in a way that emphasizes their strangeness, because they are strange. But I also want to be fair to the possibility that there are mundane explanations. Children can be frightened by unusual environments. A dark corridor set, unusual lighting, a deliberately unsettling character, these could plausibly produce nightmares. The consistency of those nightmares could be explained by the fact that all three children experienced the same highly specific visual environment. Maybe Dr. Ashworth, writing in 1989 with the diagnostic frameworks available at the time, overstated the unusualness of her findings. These are all reasonable possibilities, and I want to acknowledge them. But there are details that resist these explanations. And the deeper I looked into Gerald Tournier, the less comfortable I became with the mundane reading. Gerald Tournier left the University of Birmingham in 1992. His departure was not, as far as I can tell, acrimonious, but it was abrupt. He didn't take a position at another institution. He didn't retire. He simply stopped. His publication record, which had been steady if unspectacular through the 1980s, ceased entirely after 1991. His final published paper, which appeared in a minor educational mathematics journal, is titled Geometries of Perception, Toward a Mathematics of Subjective Experience. I found a copy of this paper. It is, and I say this as someone with a reasonable background in mathematics, deeply unusual. The paper begins conventionally enough, discussing spatial reasoning in children and the use of visual models in mathematical education. But about halfway through, it shifts. Tournier begins discussing what he calls threshold geometries, mathematical structures that exist, in his formulation, at the boundary between objective measurement and subjective perception. He argues that certain geometric configurations, when perceived by a human observer, produce not just understanding but experience, that there are shapes, patterns, spatial relationships that don't just represent concepts but generate psychological states in the viewer. He compares this to the way certain musical intervals produce emotional responses that are consistent across listeners regardless of cultural background, but he extends the analogy much further. He suggests that there are geometric forms that can produce specific, predictable cognitive and emotional states, including states that persist after the initial exposure has ended. Including, he writes, and I want to be precise here because this is important, dream state continuations of the perceived geometric experience. He published this in 1991. 2 years after the Threshold pilot. 2 years after 3 children reported identical nightmares featuring geometric imagery from his television production. And in the paper, he describes the mechanism by which this would work, the specific visual conditions, the lighting, the spatial proportions, the viewing angle, in terms that match, almost exactly, the production specifications he insisted on during the filming of the pilot. Let me say that plainly. Gerald Tournier published a paper describing how to use geometric visual stimuli to produce specific, persistent dream imagery in viewers. And the conditions he describes in the paper are the same conditions he created on the set of Threshold. Either Tournier developed his theory after observing the effects on the child actors and then wrote about it academically, or he went into the production already knowing, or at least hypothesizing, what would happen to those children. Neither possibility is comforting. After 1992, Gerald Tournier effectively vanished from public life. He maintained his home in Edgbaston, Birmingham, according to electoral rolls, until at least 2001. After that, I can find no trace of him. No death certificate in the UK public record, though that doesn't necessarily mean he didn't die. Records can be incomplete, and if he moved abroad, his death might be recorded elsewhere. No further publications. No university affiliations. No conference appearances. He simply stopped existing in any publicly documented way. I reached out to the University of Birmingham's mathematics department to ask if anyone remembered him. They had no record of a Gerald Tournier on their faculty. When I pointed them to his published papers, which list the University of Birmingham as his institutional affiliation, they said they would look into it and never responded to my follow-up. And that absence, that void where a person used to be, is what makes this story feel like it has no floor. Every time I think I've reached the bottom, there's another level beneath it. Let me come back to 2024, to the tape itself. The collector who found the Threshold pilot at the Shropshire estate sale has asked to remain anonymous, but they have spoken to several researchers and journalists about the discovery. The estate sale was conducted after the death of an elderly man. I have not been able to confirm his identity or his connection to the BBC, though the collector noted that the lot contained a significant quantity of BBC-related materials, suggesting the deceased may have been a former employee. The tape was a standard 1-inch broadcast videotape, the format used by the BBC for studio productions in the late 1980s. It was in playable condition, though with some degradation. The collector, who had the equipment to play back the format, watched the tape. They have described what they saw, and their description matches the production documents closely enough that I believe them. A long, dark corridor. Children walking through it, engaging with numerical concepts painted on the walls. A tall, thin man in a dark suit, Mr. Margin, appearing at various points along the corridor, never seen arriving, never seen leaving, speaking in a flat, rhythmic voice about the relationships between numbers. The collector described the visual style as, like someone made a children's show inside a David Lynch film, and noted that the lighting created an effect where the corridor appeared to extend infinitely in both directions, with the boundaries of the set never visible. But the collector also noted several things that are not described in the production documents. First, there are sequences in the pilot where the children are not present and Mr. Margin addresses the camera directly for extended periods. The collector described these sequences as deeply uncomfortable and said that Mr. Margin's delivery in these segments is different from his delivery when the children are present. With the children, he is measured and pedagogical, if unusually formal. Alone, speaking to the camera, he is, in the collector's words, like he's trying to teach you something you don't have the organs to understand. The collector said Mr. Margin's direct-to-camera segments discuss mathematical concepts that are far beyond the level of the target audience, concepts involving infinity, recursion, and what Mr. Margin calls, the numbers that live in the walls. The collector was uncertain whether these segments were intended to be in the final cut or were some kind of additional material recorded on the same tape, but they are continuous with the rest of the pilot, suggesting they were part of the planned episode. Second, the collector noted that the corridor set, as it appears on tape, seems to change dimensions during the episode. Not dramatically, not in a way that screams special effect, but subtly. The ceiling appears lower in some shots than in others. The width of the corridor seems to fluctuate. The numbers on the walls are not always in the same positions relative to each other. The collector initially assumed this was a continuity error, the kind of thing that happens on any production, but they said the changes felt deliberate, as if the set was designed to shift just enough to be perceived subconsciously but not consciously. Third, and the collector was hesitant to mention this because they acknowledged it might be an artifact of tape degradation, they said there were moments in the pilot where the far ends of the corridor, the parts that dissolve into darkness, appeared to contain something. Not something clearly visible. Not a figure or an object that could be described. But a variation in the darkness, a sense of density or presence, as though the darkness at the end of the corridor was not empty but occupied. The collector watched these segments multiple times and could not determine whether what they were seeing was signal or noise, intentional content or the natural breakdown of magnetic media over 35 years. And I want to note something here. The collector watched the entire pilot. They described it in detail. And they reported no nightmares. No unusual psychological effects. No lasting discomfort beyond what you'd expect from watching something genuinely creepy. Whatever happened to those children in 1989, it does not appear to happen to every viewer of the tape. Whether that's because the effect Tournier described requires specific conditions, the viewing environment, the age of the viewer, the act of being physically present on the set, or whether the effect is simply not real and the children's nightmares had a more conventional explanation, I can't say. But it's worth noting. The collector contacted the BFI, the British Film Institute, which serves as the UK's National Archive for Film and Television. The BFI accepted the tape and has preserved it. But they have not made it publicly available. Their stated reason is standard archival procedure, the tape requires further assessment, rights clearances need to be investigated, the material has not been cleared for public access. This is normal. This is how the BFI operates with newly acquired material. But given the history of this particular tape, the reason for its suppression, and the documents that have since emerged through FOI requests, the BFI's caution takes on a different complexion. You can't help but wonder whether there's a second set of reasons behind the official ones. I've requested access to the tape through the BFI's Research Access Program. My request is, as of the time of this recording, pending. Now, let me address the 5 things about this case that I have not been able to explain, no matter how hard I've tried to find conventional answers. 1. The consistency of the children's nightmares. Dr. Ashworth was a qualified child psychologist with no apparent reason to exaggerate her findings. Her report is clinical, measured, and specific. And her conclusion, that the nightmares were not consistent with normal anxiety responses, has not been challenged by any subsequent professional review, because no subsequent professional review was ever conducted. 3 children, interviewed separately, described the same dream in the same detail. That demands an explanation, and the production environment alone doesn't provide one. 2. Tournier's 1991 paper. He described, in academic language, a mechanism for producing persistent dream imagery through geometric visual stimuli, and the conditions he described matched the conditions he created on set. This is either an extraordinary coincidence or evidence that Tournier knew what he was doing, that the pilot was, at least in part, an experiment, and that the children were, whether anyone acknowledged it or not, subjects. 3. The BBC's response. The nightmares were reported. A psychologist was consulted. Her report was filed. And then nothing happened. No investigation. No inquiry. No communication with the families beyond the initial consultation. The pilot was rejected on grounds that make no reference to the psychological impact on the children. Why? If the BBC was genuinely concerned about the children's welfare, why not investigate? And if they weren't concerned, why bring in a psychologist at all? The response suggests an institution that wanted to create the appearance of having addressed the problem without actually addressing it, that wanted the paper trail without the accountability. 4. Tournier's disappearance. A university lecturer with a publication record and institutional affiliations doesn't just vanish. People leave traces. They have colleagues, students, professional networks. Tournier left none of these. And the university that employed him for nearly a decade has no record of his existence. This isn't suspicious in the conspiratorial sense. Records from the 1980s and 1990s are frequently incomplete, especially for minor faculty members, but it's deeply odd. It's as though Gerald Tournier existed only in connection to this project and then ceased to exist when the project ended. 5. The direct-to-camera segments. If the collector's description is accurate, then the pilot contains material, Mr. Margin speaking about advanced mathematical concepts in a manner described as deeply unsettling, that was never intended for children. So who was it intended for? Was Tournier using the children's show as a vehicle for something else entirely, embedding within it a layer of content aimed at a different audience or serving a different purpose? And if so, what purpose? These 5 questions sit at the center of this story like a knot I can't untie. And I've spent weeks trying. Let me tell you about one more document, the last piece of evidence I want to present before I let you draw your own conclusions. In the FOI materials, there is a single-page internal memo dated September 3, 1989, approximately 3 weeks after Dr. Ashworth submitted her report. The memo is from DH, the commissioning editor, to an unnamed superior. It is marked, confidential, not for file. The fact that it ended up in the file anyway is either an archival error or a deliberate act of preservation by someone who wanted a record to exist. The memo is brief. It reads, in its entirety. Further to our conversation of August 29 regarding the Tournier pilot. I have spoken with Dr. Ashworth and she maintains her assessment. I have also spoken with Mr. Tournier, who was dismissive of the concern and suggested that the children's responses were, in his words, evidence that the pedagogy is working as intended. I found this response troubling and recommend that all materials related to the Threshold pilot be removed from the active development file and placed in restricted archive. I also recommend that no further contact be initiated with Mr. Tournier. I do not believe he should be permitted to work with children in any capacity. Evidence that the pedagogy is working as intended. 3 children are having identical, persistent, clinically unusual nightmares, and the man who designed the show considers this evidence that his method is working. Not an unfortunate side effect. Not an unforeseen consequence. Working as intended. The nightmares were the point. Or at least, they were an expected and desired outcome of whatever Tournier was actually trying to do with that pilot. DH clearly understood how alarming this was. The memo recommends restricted archiving and no further contact with Tournier. It explicitly states that Tournier should not be allowed to work with children. But there is no evidence that these recommendations led to any formal action. No referral to Child Protection Services. No notification to the university. No report to any external body. DH sounded the alarm, and the institution absorbed the sound and went quiet. I want to take a moment to sit with that, because I think it's the most important part of this entire story. Not the nightmares themselves, not the mysterious pilot, not the vanished mathematician. The institutional silence. The way a bureaucracy can encounter something genuinely alarming, document it meticulously, and then do absolutely nothing. The paper trail exists. The concerns were raised. The recommendations were made. And the system simply moved on, leaving behind a perfectly organized file full of red flags that no one ever acted on. This is, in a sense, scarier than any ghost story. Because ghosts, if they exist, operate outside our systems. They can't be managed or reported or filed away. But Gerald Tournier was a real person, working within real institutions, who apparently designed a television production to psychologically affect children in a specific and predictable way, and the only consequence was that his pilot wasn't picked up for a series. Let me come back to the present. The tape is at the BFI. It has not been publicly released. I don't know when or if it will be. The FOI documents are available, and they tell a story that is incomplete but deeply troubling. Gerald Tournier remains untraceable. The child actors from the pilot are now in their early to mid-40s. I have not been able to identify them, and I'm not certain I would contact them if I could. Whatever they experienced in 1989, they may have long since processed it, moved past it, forgotten it. Or they may not have. And I'm not sure I have the right to reopen that door. But there are threads I'm still pulling. I mentioned earlier that Tournier's 1991 paper discussed threshold geometries, mathematical structures at the boundary of perception. I've been trying to find other researchers who worked in this area, who might have been influenced by or collaborated with Tournier. And I found one reference, a single citation of Tournier's paper in a 2003 doctoral thesis submitted to the University of Edinburgh. The thesis is on the psychology of pattern recognition, and the citation is brief, almost dismissive, noting Tournier's work as an example of unfalsifiable claims about geometric perception. But in a footnote, the thesis author mentions that they attempted to contact Tournier for clarification and received a response, not from Tournier himself but from someone identifying themselves as a colleague, stating that Tournier's work had moved beyond the published framework, and that he was no longer engaged in academic correspondence. Moved beyond the published framework. In 2003. 12 years after his last publication. Wherever Tournier was and whatever he was doing, he apparently hadn't stopped working. He'd simply stopped sharing his work with the academic world. And that raises a question that I find profoundly unsettling. If the threshold pilot was an early experiment, a proof of concept for Tournier's theories about geometric perception and its effects on the human mind, and if he continued developing those theories for at least another decade after the pilot was shelved, then what did the later work look like? What did it produce? And who, if anyone, was exposed to it? I don't have answers to those questions. I may never have answers. But I think they're worth asking, because the story of Threshold isn't just the story of a strange television pilot that frightened some children. It's the story of an idea, a theory about the relationship between what we see and what we think and what we dream, that was tested on real people without their knowledge or consent, that produced results disturbing enough to alarm the professionals who evaluated them, and that then disappeared into the same silence that swallowed its creator. The corridor in the pilot extended into darkness in both directions. The children walked and couldn't reach the end. Mr. Margin stood at both ends simultaneously, watching, not blinking, wearing a suit that wasn't quite any color, saying nothing. And the numbers on the walls were in the wrong order. Not random. Not jumbled. In the wrong order. As if the correct order was something other than 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. As if the numbers had a different sequence, a sequence that wasn't mathematical but experiential, and the children, walking through that corridor in their dreams night after night, were being taught what it was. Here's what keeps me awake, and I mean that literally. This thought has interrupted my sleep more than once since I started researching this. Dr. Ashworth's report describes the nightmares as persistent. Recurring. Night after night. But her report is dated August 14, 1989, roughly 6 to 8 weeks after filming. The report does not include a follow-up. There is no document in the file that records when, or if, the nightmares stopped. DH's memo of September 3 references Ashworth's assessment as current, suggesting the nightmares were still ongoing at that point, nearly 3 months after filming. 3 months of the same dream every night. There is a concept in psychology called dream incorporation, where elements of waking experience appear in dreams. It's normal. It's well documented. It usually fades within days as the brain processes and files the experience. 3 months is not dream incorporation. 3 months of an identical, unchanging dream is something else entirely. It's something that, in clinical literature, is typically associated with severe trauma, the kind of repetitive nightmares seen in PTSD. But the children weren't traumatized in any conventional sense. They weren't harmed on set. They weren't frightened during filming. Their parents reported that the children had no conscious distress related to the production. The nightmares came only in sleep, unbidden, unwanted, and identical. As if something had been installed. That's a word I keep coming back to. Installed. Not suggested. Not triggered. Installed. Like software. Like a program that runs when you close your eyes. I should be clear about what I'm not saying. I'm not saying Gerald Tournier discovered a way to program dreams. I'm not saying the threshold pilot is a supernatural artifact. I'm not saying the BBC knowingly participated in psychological experimentation on children. What I am saying is that the available evidence describes a situation that doesn't fit neatly into any conventional explanatory framework, and that the people who were in the best position to investigate it chose not to. I want to mention one final detail. It's small, and it may mean nothing, but it's the kind of detail that I can't stop thinking about. The collector who found the tape described the handwritten label, Threshold, Pilot, not for TX. Standard enough. But they also mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that on the other side of the tape housing, in different handwriting, smaller, neater, written in pencil rather than marker, there was a single line that read, "The children will remember the way." Not their way. Not the way home. Not the way out. Just, the children will remember the way. I don't know who wrote that. I don't know when. I don't know what it means. But I know that 3 children, in the summer of 1989, walked through a corridor that went nowhere, guided by a man who stood at both ends simultaneously, learning a mathematics that nobody taught in any school, dreaming dreams they couldn't wake from, and that the man who put them there considered it evidence of success. The tape is in the BFI. It's preserved. It's catalogued. It's real. And it has not been made available to the public. I think about those children, adults now, going about their lives in some part of England. I wonder if they remember. I wonder if they still dream of corridors. I wonder if the numbers ever rearranged themselves into the right order, whatever that means, whatever that could possibly mean. And I wonder if somewhere, in a house or a flat or a room we can't find, Gerald Tournier is still working, still refining his geometries, still looking for the architecture of numbers made visible, the shapes that teach you things you never asked to learn and can never quite forget. The BBC made a children's show in 1989. It gave every child actor the same nightmare. They buried it. Someone found it. And now the question isn't what the show was about or why it was made. The question is simpler and much worse. What were those children being taught? What do you think really happened on the set of Threshold? Was Gerald Tournier a misguided academic whose unconventional methods had unintended psychological effects on vulnerable children? Was he something more deliberate, more calculated, a man who knowingly used a television production as a delivery mechanism for an experiment in perceptual manipulation? Or is there another explanation entirely, something I haven't considered, something in the geometry of this story that I'm not seeing because I'm standing too close to see the shape of it? Leave your theory below. I'll be reading every single one.